Hi, I'm Madison. I'm a graphic designer working freelance from my tiny apartment in Portland. I spend most of my days creating logos for small businesses and wedding invitations. Ironic, considering what I'm about to tell you. But that day, scrolling through my sister's wedding photos on Instagram, I felt my entire world crumble in ways I never thought possible. My phone screen blurred as tears filled my eyes. Photo after photo of pure joy, laughter, and celebration. The venue was gorgeous, white roses everywhere, fairy lights twinkling like stars. Emma looked absolutely radiant in her flowing dress, practically glowing as she danced with her new husband. But as I kept scrolling, a sick feeling started growing in my stomach. Everyone was there, and I mean everyone. Our cousins from Nebraska, who we only saw at Christmas. Mrs. Patterson, Emma's high school chemistry teacher, who she'd barely mentioned in years. The neighbors from 2 houses down who I didn't even know she talked to. College friends, work colleagues, even the barista from the coffee shop she frequented. The guest list seemed endless, filled with faces both familiar and completely random. Everyone except me. My hands started trembling as I read Emma's caption under the main wedding photo. We've only invited the people who are truly important to us, grateful for everyone who made our special day perfect. The words hit me like a physical blow. People who are truly important. The message was crystal clear. I wasn't one of them. I stared at that sentence for what felt like hours, reading it over and over, hoping I'd misunderstood something. But there was no misunderstanding the absence of my face in a single photo. No misunderstanding the fact that my own sister's wedding had happened without me even knowing the date. Have you ever felt completely invisible to the people who are supposed to love you most? That crushing realization that maybe you never mattered as much as you thought you did? The worst part wasn't even being excluded. It was discovering it this way. Through social media, like some distant acquaintance catching up on life events. I hadn't received an invitation. Hell, I hadn't even been told they'd set a date. The last I'd heard, Emma was thinking about maybe planning something small next year. I called my mom immediately, my voice shaking as the phone rang. She picked up on the third ring, her tone already defensive before I'd said a word. Madison, before you start. Mom, what the hell? Emma got married? When were you planning to tell me? You're overreacting. It's just a wedding. Her dismissive voice echoed through the phone, that same tone I'd heard my entire life whenever I dared to express hurt or disappointment. They wanted something intimate, family only. I am family. I'm her sister. You know how stressful wedding planning is. Emma didn't want any drama. Any drama. As if my mere presence would somehow ruin her perfect day. As if asking to be included in my own sister's wedding was unreasonable. I felt that familiar sting. Being painted as the problem child, the one who always caused trouble simply by existing. What drama, Mom? What have I ever done to deserve this? But she'd already started listing reasons. How I'd been difficult at Emma's engagement party by asking too many questions about the timeline. How I'd made everything about myself when I'd offered to design their wedding invitations for free. How I was always so sensitive about family events. Each accusation felt like another brick being added to a wall that had been building between us for years. I was the eldest daughter, the one who'd helped raise Emma when our parents traveled for work. I'd taught her how to ride a bike, helped her with homework, stayed up all night when she had nightmares, but somehow I'd become the outsider. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying every family interaction from the past year, looking for clues I'd missed. The conversations that stopped when I walked into a room. The inside jokes I wasn't part of. The way Emma would quickly change the subject whenever I asked about wedding plans. I'd thought they were just being private. I never imagined they were actively planning to exclude me. The next morning brought another devastating discovery. While making coffee, I impulsively checked our family group chat. The Chen girls, where Mom usually shared updates about everyone's lives. But when I opened it, I found something that made my blood run cold. I wasn't in the group anymore. The chat still existed, but somehow I'd been removed. I could see it in my message history, but I couldn't send anything new. The last message I could see was from 3 months ago. My own text asking if anyone wanted to do Sunday brunch. No one had responded. My fingers flew across my phone screen, checking every family group chat I'd ever been part of. Chen family updates. Holiday planning. Mom's birthday surprise. Gone. All of them. I'd been systematically removed from every family communication, and I'd been too busy with work to notice. How long had they been planning things without me? How many family dinners had happened? How many decisions had been made? How many moments had I missed while thinking I was still part of the family? I called Emma directly, my heart pounding as her phone rang. It went straight to voicemail, that cheerful, bubbly message she'd recorded years ago. "Hi, you've reached Emma. I'm probably off on some adventure, but leave me a message and I'll get back to you when I can." Some adventure, like her honeymoon. The honeymoon I knew nothing about. I left a message anyway. "Em, it's Madison. I saw the photos. They're beautiful and you look absolutely gorgeous. I wish I'd been there. Can we talk when you get back? I love you." She never called back. The silence from my family was deafening, but it also gave me time to think. Really think about the patterns I'd been ignoring for years. The way Emma had become the golden child somewhere along the way, while I'd been relegated to the role of the difficult one. The way my parents always had time for her problems but rolled their eyes at mine. The way family stories gradually shifted to center around her achievements while mine became footnotes. I remembered Emma's high school graduation, where Mom spent the entire dinner talking about Emma's college plans while barely mentioning that I'd just landed my first freelance contract. I remembered Christmas 2 years ago when Emma's promotion got announced with champagne while my moving to Portland got a polite, "That's nice, dear." When had I become so forgettable? But then something shifted in my thinking. A memory surfaced that made my breath catch. Something I hadn't thought about in months. My grandmother's ring. Grandma Chen had raised me during those early years when Mom and Dad traveled constantly for their consulting business. She was the one who taught me to draw, who encouraged my artistic dreams, who made me feel special and loved. Before she passed away 5 years ago, she'd pulled me aside and shown me her most precious piece of jewelry, a vintage sapphire ring that had belonged to her own grandmother. "This will be yours someday, Madison," she'd whispered, her weathered hands gentle as she slipped it onto my finger to check the size. "You're my firstborn granddaughter. You've been like a daughter to me. Promise me you'll wear it and think of all the strong women who came before you." I'd promised. We'd both cried a little. It was one of my most treasured memories. But in all of Emma's wedding photos, there it was. Grandma's ring, on Emma's finger. My grandmother's ring, the one specifically promised to me, sparkling on my sister's hand as she cut her wedding cake. The ring that represented the only person in my family who'd ever made me feel truly valued and loved. They hadn't just excluded me from the wedding. They'd stolen my inheritance. Suddenly, this wasn't just about a missed invitation anymore. This was about a systematic erasure of my place in the family, right down to taking away the one thing that connected me to the only person who'd ever truly understood me. I stared at those photos until my eyes burned, zooming in on that ring, remembering how it had felt on my finger during that precious moment with Grandma, how she'd smiled and said it looked like it belonged there, how she'd made me promise to pass it down to my own daughter someday. Emma had never been close to Grandma the way I was. She'd been too busy with friends and school activities to spend much time with an elderly woman who moved slowly and told the same stories over and over. But I'd cherished those stories. I'd learned to make Grandma's dumplings. I'd helped her tend her tiny garden. I'd been the one holding her hand when she died. And now Emma was wearing her ring like it had always belonged to her. That's when I knew this wasn't over. This wasn't something I could just accept and move on from. They'd crossed a line that went beyond wedding invitations and group chats. They'd taken something that wasn't theirs to give. As I sat in my small apartment, surrounded by the quiet that had become my life, I made a decision. I wasn't going to disappear quietly. I wasn't going to let them erase me from the family without consequences. But I also wasn't going to make any moves until I knew exactly what I was dealing with. If they wanted to play games with family history and inheritance, then I needed to understand the rules they were playing by. That ring was just the beginning. Something told me that if I dug deeper into what had happened after Grandma's death, I'd find more than just a piece of jewelry that had been given to the wrong person. I'd find the truth about how I'd been written out of my own family story. The next morning, I started what would become the most important investigation of my life. If my family thought they could rewrite history and steal my inheritance, they were about to learn that they'd underestimated me completely. I began with Grandma's house. After she passed, Mom and Dad had been in charge of sorting through her belongings. They'd told me everything important had been distributed according to her wishes, but now I wondered what else they might have conveniently overlooked or redistributed. I drove to the old neighborhood where Grandma had lived for 40 years. Mrs. Kim, her next-door neighbor, was still there, tending to her roses just like she had when I was a child, visiting Grandma every weekend. "Madison!" she exclaimed, her face lighting up. "I haven't seen you since the funeral. How are you, sweetheart?" "I'm okay, Mrs. Kim. I was actually wondering if you might know something. Did Grandma ever mention anything to you about her will? Specifically about her sapphire ring?" Mrs. Kim's expression grew serious. "Oh, honey, she talked about that ring constantly. She was so excited to pass it down to you. She said you were the only one who really understood the family history, who cared about the stories behind her treasures." My heart clenched. She specifically said it was for me? Many times. She even showed me the letter she wrote to go with it. She kept it in that old jewelry box on her dresser, along with the ring. Mrs. Kim paused, studying my face. "Madison, please tell me you received both the ring and the letter?" I shook my head, feeling sick. "I didn't get either." Mrs. Kim's face darkened. "That's not right. That's not right at all. Your grandmother was very clear about her wishes. She made me promise to make sure you knew how much you meant to her. She invited me inside for tea, and for the next hour she shared memory after memory of my grandmother talking about me. How proud she was of my art. How she'd saved every birthday card I'd made her. How she'd worried that I was too sensitive for this world, but knew that sensitivity was also my greatest strength. She used to say you had her heart," Mrs. Kim told me, tears in her eyes. "That's why the ring was so important. It wasn't just jewelry. It was a symbol of the love that connected all the women in your family line." When I left Mrs. Kim's house, I had something more valuable than I'd hoped for: the name of my grandmother's lawyer. Robert Hendricks had been practicing estate law for over 30 years, and his office was exactly what you'd expect from someone who'd been handling wills since before computers took over everything. Wood paneling, leather chairs, and filing cabinets that looked like they'd survived several decades. "Chen," he mused, flipping through his files. "Eleanor Chen. Yes, I remember her well. Lovely woman. Very particular about her wishes. I'm her granddaughter, Madison. I was wondering if I could ask you about her will, specifically regarding a sapphire ring." Mr. Hendricks pulled out a thick file and adjusted his glasses. "Ah, yes, the ring. Very specific instructions about that piece. Let me see." He scanned through the documents. "Here it is. My sapphire ring, inherited from my own grandmother, shall pass to my eldest granddaughter, Madison Chen, along with the letter I have written, explaining its significance to our family." The words hit me like a physical blow. There it was, in black and white, in my grandmother's own will. Legal documentation that the ring belonged to me, not Emma. "Mr. Hendricks, I never received the ring or any letter. My sister is currently wearing it." His eyebrows shot up. "That's highly irregular. Your parents were the executors of the estate. They should have ensured all specific bequests were distributed according to your grandmother's wishes." He leaned forward, his expression concerned. "Do you have reason to believe this was not an oversight?" I told him about the wedding, the exclusion, the systematic removal from family communications. Mr. Hendricks listened with the practiced attention of someone who'd seen family disputes tear apart inheritances before. "Miss Chen, I'm going to make copies of the relevant portions of the will for you. You have legal standing to reclaim your inheritance. But I should warn you, family disputes over estates can get very messy, very quickly." "It's already messy," I said quietly. "At least now I'll have the truth on my side." Armed with legal documentation, I felt emboldened to dig deeper. I spent the next week calling every family friend I could remember, asking carefully worded questions about what they remembered from Grandma's final years. Aunt Linda, Dad's sister who lived in California, was particularly illuminating. "Oh, Madison, your grandmother talked about you constantly when I visited. She was so worried about your parents traveling so much when you were young, so grateful that you'd spent so much time with her. She always said you were the one who really knew her heart." "Aunt Linda, do you remember her talking about leaving me anything specific?" "The ring, of course. Of She was so excited about passing it down to you. She said it had been waiting for the right person for generations, and you were it. She even had me help her write that letter explaining the history." Linda paused. "Wait, didn't you get the letter?" She spent weeks working on it, wanting to make sure she captured every story about the women who wore that ring before her. Another piece of evidence. Another confirmation that what happened wasn't an accident or oversight, it was deliberate. The breakthrough came when I remembered something that made my blood run cold. During Grandma's final weeks, when she was in and out of the hospital, Emma had suddenly become very interested in spending time with her. At the time, I'd been touched that my sister was finally bonding with our grandmother. I'd even encouraged it, thinking it was beautiful that Emma was making an effort. But now I wondered if Emma's sudden devotion had had an ulterior motive. I called the nursing staff at the hospital where Grandma had spent her final days. Most of them didn't remember specific details, but one nurse, Sarah, had a remarkably good memory. "Oh yes, I remember Eleanor. Such a sweet lady. And I remember her granddaughters too. One of them, the younger one with the blonde hair, she started visiting a lot near the end. She was very interested in your grandmother's jewelry, asking lots of questions about family heirlooms." "What kind of questions?" "Well, she wanted to know about the value of certain pieces, whether your grandmother had made any recent changes to her will. It struck me as odd because your grandmother always talked about her other granddaughter, you, I think, as the one who would inherit her special things." My hands were shaking as I wrote down every detail. "Did the blonde granddaughter ever bring up specific pieces of jewelry?" "Yes, actually. There was a ring she was particularly interested in, a blue stone. She asked your grandmother several times about it, saying how much she'd always admired it. Your grandmother seemed confused by the attention, to be honest. She kept saying the ring was already spoken for." The picture was becoming horrifyingly clear. While I'd been working overtime to pay for my own expenses and occasionally helping with Grandma's medical bills, Emma had been systematically manipulating a dying woman. But I needed more than hospital memories. I needed concrete proof. That's when I remembered something that made my heart race. Grandma had been old-fashioned about some things, but she'd loved her iPad. I'd taught her how to use it to video call me when I couldn't visit in person. She'd been so proud of learning technology, always showing off her new skills. If Emma had been manipulating her near the end, there might be evidence in her digital communications. It took some detective work, but I finally tracked down who had inherited Grandma's iPad. Cousin Julie had it, using it mainly for her kids to play games. When I explained what I was looking for, she was happy to help me search through the old messages and emails. What we found was devastating. Email after email between Emma and Grandma in those final weeks. Emma's messages were crafted with surgical precision, sweet, loving, but with subtle suggestions woven throughout. "I've always felt so close to you, Grandma. I know Madison has been the one to spend the most time with you, but I hope you know how much you mean to me, too. I've always loved hearing about our family history, especially about the women who came before us. That ring of yours is so beautiful. I've always imagined what it would be like to wear something with so much family history." And then, more directly, "I know you've always planned to leave the ring to Madison, but I can't help wondering if you've considered that I might be the one who'd truly treasure it. Madison is so focused on her career and living far away. I'm the one who's staying close to home, who's planning to start a family soon. Maybe I'd be the better guardian of family treasures." The emails showed a gradual, manipulative campaign to make my grandmother doubt her original intentions. Emma played on Grandma's concerns about my moving to Portland, about my focus on my career over family, about my not being settled down yet. But the most damning piece of evidence was an email from just 2 weeks before Grandma died. "Grandma, I've been thinking so much about our conversation yesterday. I'm so touched that you're reconsidering the ring situation. I promise I'll treasure it always and make sure it stays in the family. Madison will understand. She's always been more interested in her art than jewelry anyway. This way, the ring can be part of my wedding, which I know would make you so happy. I can't wait to wear it and think of you on my special day. The final email in the chain was from Grandma, and reading it broke my heart. Dear Emma, I've been praying about this decision. You've made some valid points about family continuity and staying close to home. If you truly believe this is best for our family's future, then perhaps the ring should go to you instead. I trust your judgment about what Madison would want. Please make sure she understands this comes from a place of love. I stared at that email for a long time, tears streaming down my face. My grandmother, in her final weeks, confused and probably medicated, had been convinced to change her mind about something she'd been clear about for years. Emma had systematically undermined my relationship with Grandma, painting me as distant and career-focused while positioning herself as the devoted, family-oriented granddaughter. But here's what Emma hadn't counted on. My grandmother's lawyer still had the original will. The emails might show a change of heart, but they didn't constitute a legal change to the will. The ring still legally belonged to me. Julie was horrified by what we'd found. Madison, this is horrible. Emma basically manipulated a dying woman. You have to do something about this. I was going to do something about it. But first, I needed to understand the full scope of what had happened. If Emma had been willing to manipulate our grandmother about the ring, what else had she influenced? I spent the next few days going through every piece of digital evidence we could find. What I discovered was a systematic campaign to position Emma as the more devoted granddaughter while painting me as selfish and distant. Emma had saved screenshots of my social media posts about work projects, sending them to Grandma with comments like, "Look how busy Madison is with her career. I worry she doesn't have time for family anymore." She'd shared my posts about Portland's art scene with captions like, "Madison seems to love her new city more than anything else." Meanwhile, she'd been crafting her own image as the perfect granddaughter. Photos of herself at family dinners I hadn't been invited to. Updates about her wedding plans that emphasized her desire to honor family traditions. Messages about how much she missed Grandma and wanted to carry on her legacy. It was masterfully manipulative, and it had worked. But now I had everything I needed. Legal documentation proving the ring was mine. Evidence of manipulation. Witness testimony about my grandmother's true intentions. The question was what to do with it all. That's when fate handed me the perfect opportunity. 3 weeks after my discovery, I received an unexpected text from my cousin Sarah. "Hey, Madison. Emma's having a housewarming party this weekend to show off all her wedding gifts. Mom says the whole family's invited. Thought you might want to know in case your invitation got lost." The invitation hadn't gotten lost. I hadn't been invited. Again. But this time, I didn't care about their invitation. I was going to attend anyway, because it was time for Emma to learn that stealing from family comes with consequences. I spent the rest of the week preparing. I made copies of everything: the will, the emails, the hospital records, the witness statements. I contacted Mr. Hendricks and asked him to attend with me as my legal representative. I even reached out to Mrs. Kim and Aunt Linda asking if they'd be willing to speak on my grandmother's behalf. They all said yes. Saturday afternoon, I stood outside Emma's new house, the one she'd bought with wedding gift money and her new husband's salary. Through the windows, I could see the party in full swing. The same faces from her wedding photos, laughing and celebrating Emma's perfect new life, the life she'd built by erasing me from our family story. I took a deep breath, straightened my shoulders, and walked up to the front door. Mr. Hendricks was right behind me, carrying a folder full of legal documents. Mrs. Kim had insisted on coming too, saying my grandmother would have wanted someone there to speak for her. I didn't knock. I simply opened the door and walked in, like family members do. The conversation stopped the moment I appeared. Emma was in the middle of telling someone about her wedding, gesturing animatedly with her hands. The hand wearing my grandmother's ring. "Madison?" Mom's voice was sharp with surprise and annoyance. "What are you doing here?" "Hello, Mom. Hi, Emma." I kept my voice calm and pleasant. "Congratulations on the new house. It's beautiful." Emma's face had gone pale, her hand instinctively moving to cover the ring. She knew. She knew exactly why I was there. I don't understand, Dad said, looking confused. Madison, how did I know about the party? Family tends to talk, Dad. Amazing how much you learn when you start asking the right questions. I walked further into the room, Mr. Hendricks and Mrs. Kim flanking me. The party guests sensed the tension immediately, conversations trailing off as people turned to watch what was clearly about to be a family confrontation. Emma, I said, my voice carrying clearly through the suddenly quiet room. That's a beautiful ring you're wearing. It looks very familiar. Emma's face flushed red. Madison, this isn't the place. Actually, I think this is exactly the place. I pulled out the first document from my folder. You see, everyone, I've just learned something fascinating about that ring. It turns out it legally belongs to me. The room erupted in murmurs as I held up my grandmother's will for everyone to see. According to this legal document, my grandmother specifically left her sapphire ring to me, her eldest granddaughter, along with a letter explaining its significance to our family. You're being dramatic, Mom snapped. Emma was closer to Grandma at the end. She changed her mind. Did she? I pulled out the printed emails. Because according to these communications I found on Grandma's iPad, it seems Emma spent quite a bit of time convincing a confused, dying woman to doubt her own clearly stated wishes. I began reading excerpts from Emma's emails aloud, my voice steady and clear. With each manipulative sentence, Emma's face grew paler and the room grew quieter. The party guests, many of whom had known our grandmother, listened with increasing shock and disgust. Mrs. Kim stepped forward when I finished reading. For the record, she announced to the room, Eleanor talked to me many times about that ring. She was very clear it was for Madison. She was excited about Madison carrying on the family tradition. And, added Mr. Hendricks, his lawyer's voice carrying authority that silenced any potential protests, the legal will was never changed. Regardless of any informal conversations, the ring legally belongs to Madison. Emma is currently in possession of stolen property. The words hung in the air like a bomb. Stolen property. Said by a lawyer in front of the entire family and all of Emma's new in-laws. Emma finally found her voice, but it came out as a whisper. Madison, please, can't we talk about this privately? Privately? I looked around the room at all the faces that had been at her wedding, all the people who were truly important to her. Like how you privately excluded me from your wedding? Like how you privately removed me from family group chats? Like how you privately manipulated our dying grandmother? The room was dead silent now. You could have heard a pin drop. I think it's time everyone knew the truth about what's been happening in this family, I continued. About how I've been systematically erased from family events and communications. About how I discovered my sister's wedding through Instagram because no one bothered to tell me it was happening. About how the one person in this family who truly loved me was manipulated on her deathbed. Emma was crying now, but they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of humiliation and anger at being exposed. You always have to make everything about you, she sobbed. Even Grandma's death, even my wedding. You can't stand that I'm happy. The accusation hit like a slap, but I was ready for it. I'd heard this song before. You know what, Emma? You're right. I am making this about me. Because for the first time in years, I'm standing up for myself. Instead of quietly accepting whatever scraps of family inclusion you decided to throw my way. I turned to address the room, my voice growing stronger with each word. My grandmother raised me when my parents traveled for work. She taught me to draw, to cook her recipes, to value family history. She promised me this ring as a symbol of the strong women in our family line. She made me promise to wear it and think of all those who came before me. I looked directly at Emma. And you convinced a confused, dying woman to doubt her own heart so you could have a pretty accessory for your wedding photos. The silence that followed was deafening. I could see the judgment in every face around the room, the disgust, the disappointment. Emma's new in-laws looked horrified. Her friends looked uncomfortable. Even our parents looked shaken by the full picture of what had transpired. Mr. Hendricks stepped forward with official-looking papers. Emma, I have here the legal documentation proving Madison's ownership of the ring, along with a formal demand for its return. You have 48 hours to comply before we pursue legal action for theft of inherited property. Emma's hands were shaking as she looked down at the ring, then back at me. The room waited to see what she would do. I can't just take it off here, she whispered. Actually, you can. I held out my hand. Right now, in front of everyone who witnessed you wearing stolen property. For a moment, I thought she might refuse. I thought she might try to run or argue or create more drama. But the weight of evidence, the presence of a lawyer, and the judgment of everyone in the room finally broke through her defenses. With shaking hands, Emma slipped the ring off her finger. She held it for a moment as if she couldn't quite believe she was giving it up, then placed it in my outstretched palm. The ring was warm from her skin, but as I slipped it onto my own finger, the finger my grandmother had measured years ago, it felt like coming home. It felt like my grandmother's love settling back where it belonged. There's something else, and I said, my voice softer now that I had what was rightfully mine. The letter Grandma wrote to go with this ring. Where is it? Emma's face crumpled. I threw it away. After the emails, I thought if there was no letter, it would be easier to pretend the ring had always been meant for me. The admission sent another wave of shock through the room. She hadn't just stolen my inheritance. She'd destroyed a piece of my grandmother's love that could never be replaced. But in that moment, I realized something important. I didn't need that letter anymore. Because standing in that room, surrounded by people who'd finally seen the truth, wearing my grandmother's ring where it belonged, I felt her love anyway. I felt her strength. I felt the power of every strong woman who'd worn this ring before me. You know what the really sad part is, Emma? I said, looking at my sister who was still crying into her husband's shoulder. Grandma had enough love for both of us. There were plenty of other meaningful things she could have left you, but you couldn't stand the thought of me having something special, so you took the one thing that was specifically mine. I looked around the room one more time, at all the faces that had celebrated Emma's wedding without me, at the family that had excluded me from their joy. I came here today to get back what was stolen from me. But I'm leaving with something more valuable, the knowledge that I don't need your approval to be worth something. I don't need to be included in your events to have value, and I don't need to stay quiet when I'm being mistreated just to keep the peace. I turned toward the door, then paused for one final message. Oh, and Emma, the next time you want to erase someone from the family, make sure they don't have a lawyer and a paper trail. As I walked out of that house, I heard the party completely fall apart behind me. Conversations erupted as guests processed what they'd witnessed. I heard Emma sobbing, my mother's sharp voice trying to regain control, my father's confused questions about what had really happened. But I didn't look back. 3 days later, my phone started ringing. First Emma, then Mom, then Dad. They wanted to talk. They wanted to explain. They wanted to work things out as a family. But here's the thing they didn't understand. I wasn't the same person who'd been quietly excluded from family events for years. I wasn't the same person who'd accepted their gaslighting and dismissiveness. I wasn't the same person who'd prioritized keeping the peace over standing up for myself. I was my grandmother's granddaughter. I was wearing her ring and carrying her strength. I was the person she'd believed I could become. And that person didn't need their apologies or explanations. That person had built a life they could either choose to be part of respectfully or watch from the outside while I continued thriving without them. The ring caught the light as I typed my response to their messages. I'm open to rebuilding our relationship, but only on the foundation of honesty and respect. The days of quietly accepting mistreatment to maintain family harmony are over. Some of them would step up, some of them wouldn't. But either way, I'd be fine. Because I'd finally learned the most important lesson my grandmother had tried to teach me. That I was valuable enough to fight for, strong enough to stand alone, and loved enough by the people who truly mattered to never settle for less than I deserved again. Have you ever had to choose between keeping the peace and standing up for yourself? Have you ever discovered that the people who claim to love you have been working behind your scenes to diminish your place in their lives? I'd love to hear your story. I'd love to hear. Share it in the comments below. I'll read every single one and I promise I'll believe you.